Guiding. I grew up at Blanket Glacier Chalet, and I'm your MC tonight. For some of you in the crowd, who's the first timers here? Brad. And how many sledders do we have? Heck yeah, we need more. Thanks for coming, homies. You're gonna be working the bar. Cool. Guys, obviously, what an exciting night. There's actually, here's a good question. Did anyone do a skiing or snowmobiling today? You did?
Yeah.
It's probably good snowmobiling. Oh, you're skiing. Where'd you go?
Next to Keystone Peak.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Was it snowing?
No, it's raining.
Yeah. Wet powder. Yeah, I'm in marketing, so yeah, wet powder. Actually, you know what? Ben just checked the stove webcam, and there's snowflakes coming down. So there's hope.
Oh.
And hopefully, yeah, you're gonna beat us down with some information and bring us up at the end. Are you not, Ben?
Absolutely.
Awesome, you guys. We got a big night tonight. I'm gonna shoot some. Oh, it's down, isn't it? Yeah. I'm gonna shoot some enthusiasm and respect to those that have been here before us. So we're obviously gathering here on the unceded lands of the Sinix, Secwepemc, Ktunaxa, and Selkirks Okanagan peoples. And what's kind of cool about tonight, a bunch of experience from snowmobiling to skiing. So just throwing some enthusiasm for everyone that's showing up here tonight. Guys, this is a cool night where particularly Ben's going to be showing a bunch of conditions and experience out in the field. So because of that, we would like to read out the legal terms of this fun contract to you. So tonight, you guys, the information that we're presenting are our own observations to the best of our ability, mostly Ben's. This presentation tonight does not replace actual avalanche training, so please sign up for an avalanche skills training course or CA professional course this winter or next. What you do with this information that we present is up to you. It's your responsibility. I think with great power comes great responsibility. I think that goes. Shena, you're probably gonna have some current information as well, so I shouldn't take away from that. So you guys, what is State of the Snowpack? For some of you guys that have been here so far, how would you put it into your own words? Yeah, the current snowpack is definitely wet. I'm touching more on like what's tonight all about. You guys, this is an opportunity for us as professionals to share what we've seen in the field. We're going to try our best to stimulate the conversation. It's kind of cool with this group size, is I think that's going to happen tonight. But the whole idea here, this non-for-profit that was started out of Nelson, different chapters on every mountain town, is kind of give us a format to communicate this information. But ultimately, the idea is to share this information to save lives. That was a question. You're just taking a photo of me. So guys, that's exactly it. The whole idea is decrease the amount of incidents in the field by sharing this information from us professionals, stimulating the conversation. Whole idea, we're going to take the avalanche bulletin, the InfoX that we read, and our observations to stimulate that conversation. Basically, giving you guys as much information as we can. This is like a cool platform. I always thought it was a great platform just to grab a beer, and some of the best mentorship I've ever had is at the end of the day. It's kind of partnering on the field, so that's kind of the whole idea here. Guys, the State of the Snowpack is doing great things. And obviously it's a non-for-profit, so how they get that money is through sponsorship and donations. So on that note, tons of enthusiasm to Healthy Cat Canada, Arcteryx, Polaris, Hub, Klim, Selkirks Tangiers. And I'm really focused on this slide. Soul Rides training, Mountain Stash Adventures, that obviously presented, Shena's obviously presenting tonight. And my business is Canadian Powder Guides, which Ben has been part of as well. And the Legion. Tons of enthusiasm to Taylor. Taylor's been putting together these events. Taylor's on the live stream tonight, so props to Taylor. Thank you. So you guys, this is how it's going to lay out tonight. Ben's going to start out with State of the Snowpack. He's got a bunch of information, what's happened so far, what's recently happened, and I think at the end we'll have some conversation on what is likely going to happen in the future. Then we'll have a bit of an intermission, and really psyched to have some sledding enthusiasm tonight with Shena presenting next. Shena's talking particularly about kind of that stress bubble on the snowpack. So like, particularly on snowmobiles, you imagine how low we can go affecting those weak layers, which is like how pertinent to this snowpack right now to be talking about that. Yeah, if you guys are new, the format that Ben's gonna talk about here is just like, obviously current conditions, but really like bringing us up to date with the snowpack and like what's happened underneath and talking about what's underneath our feet and, you know, from previous avalanches to, yeah, basically upcoming weather and what our forecast, using the avalanche bulletins, what the forecast is moving forward. So try to simulate the conversation, but Ben's got a sweet presentation here. So without further ado, Ben Yeager.
All right, on. Well, thanks for the good intro there, Marty, and thanks for everybody coming out tonight. I know it's kind of a funny time to have this conversation. It's a good time to have the conversation, but like we all are very well aware of, the last couple of days have been quite wet out there. So just to kind of lay the groundwork of what I'd like to do tonight. I don't think you guys need an avalanche professional to come up here and tell you that it's raining right now and that it's really wet out there. But what I would like to do is spend quite a bit of time talking about our last 3 to 4 weeks. I think the last time we had one of these talks was February 19th, maybe, so exactly a month ago. We went through like a very dynamic month of avalanche hazard and dealing with some weak layers. We'll talk about what that looked like for us in the field, and which can help us kind of get some tools for the next time we're dealing with this. Being here in the interior in Revelstoke, we are kind of more prone to dealing with like surface soil layers that want to linger for a long time, and different sorts of persistent weak layers. It's like a very common theme for us. So although that might be changing in the near future, hopefully, these like tools and strategies and tips will definitely work for seasons to come. And I'm curious to hear, hopefully, from some of you guys, kind of your thoughts from the last few weeks. Because it definitely has not been a gimme out there for the last few weeks. We've been treating terrain really carefully, having a lot of conversations and guys meeting about what's going on out there. It has not been like point shoot skiing for the last few weeks. We've been pretty thoughtful out there. So we'll dive into that a bit. We will talk about what's going on out there right now, and then like Marty said, we'll finish it off hopefully on a bit of a positive and look into the next kind of week to come and what's likely to happen over the next few days. So somebody said it, current state of snowpack is pretty darn wet. If we flash back forward, so today's Thursday, I would have come out with blankets, Glacier Chalet last Monday. Anyone went skiing last week? Skiing was awesome.
Sick.
Yeah, it was really, really good. And although the last few weeks have been challenging with hazard and stability, the riding quality has been like very high. And you just had to like really kind of pick and choose with your spots. So that's been awesome. Choosing to be a little bit optimistic with my photo choice. Some great skiing the last few days. We've seen a lot of large avalanches in the last month, and we'll talk a bunch about that. Like large crowns in the middle of the forest. That's nice days. Got all sorts of avalanche activity. So yeah, we'll start off kind of like big picture, where we're at this year compared to the last few years, and just how much it's been precipitating. This is up Mount Revelstoke, so right behind us there, weather station at 1,850 meters. We're the blue line here this year. So you can see we actually have already surpassed last year's total by the mid of March, which is fantastic. We've almost 1,500 mils of precip up there, so pretty significant. At the blanket last week, we were darn close to having a 4-meter party at the lodge. The height of snow was like 395 centimeters. That's 1,770 meters. So all things considered, we have a ton of snow on the ground, which is great. Looking at the last 7 days up there, it's kind of funny. The snow depth did show up on any of these for the last 7 days. It's kind of high. But if we look at our temperatures, that's our 0 degree line. So you can see just after the 16th, we went above 0 degrees up there. And the last 7 days, we have almost 100 mils of precip fall up there. So pretty significant precip totals. Looking at Keystone Creek, so northern Selkirks, about 50K north of town. Similar elevation, 1,840 meters. We've got well over 1,000 mils of precip, and again, kind of capping or peaking what we had at any point last year. we can see the same trend up there, above 0 degrees and almost 100 mils of preset, and that doesn't include today's preset cold as well. I think today was basically our wettest day of the last few. And then one more for us to look at, and big difference here. So this is Rogers Pass at 1,180 meters, so well below tree line, and we are like well exceeded what we had last year, which has been great. And we've been skiing in Rogers Pass in particular. You probably noticed like there's been more fun skiing right to the highway this year than the years past, and just like general coverage and trees and whatnot. Exiting and entering the valleys has been a little bit easier. And same story there. Actually looks like it was maybe a bit warmer up higher the last couple of days, but right around that 100 mil preset total as well. If only it was like -5 the last few days, it'd be like up to here right now. So yeah, we'll spend a lot of time talking about our few kind of big players that we've been dealing with for the last month or so, and then we'll flash this slide up again at the end after we've talked about it and we kind of have an understanding as to what we've been dealing with for the last month. So I'll start up at the top. We do have moist, wet snow up to about 2,200 meters, potentially a little bit higher. I did get some live field updates from the guys that are up at the blanket who actually went skiing today and stayed out most of the day and found some reasonable skiing. So there is some light at the end of the tunnel. We've got moist, wet, saturated snow up to 2,200 meters at least. Last week, mid-March, March 15th, we had a pretty sunny day. We got a bunch of sun crust out there, and we saw a little bit of reactivity on that in the last few days. But our big three that we'll talk about a lot tonight, I want to start with our March 8th rain crust. And for people 1 or 2 who don't know about these dates always refer to the day that those wheat layers got buried. So this rain crust actually formed up. It rained on the 6th and 7th, and on the 8th it got cold, formed the crust, and started snowing. So that's why we're calling it the March 8th rain crust, which exists up to about 2,000 meters. If you were skiing like a week ago, you probably noticed like around 1,700 meters, things got like pretty bumpy. You had dust on crust towards valley bottom, but up high the skiing was really good. And then the biggest two that we're going to talk about the most, this one's actually like free. The February 7th, 9th, 13th, surface ore, sun crust, and facets there. That's basically, we had like, we'll get a little more in detail in a minute. We had a handful of surface ore layers and multitude of sun crust all formed up within the same like 30 centimeters of snow or so. So we've often just been lumping all of those together in one. So we had an avalanche down 70 or one down 80. It didn't really matter what it was. It was all kind of getting treated the same. We've got our January 26th surface ore, melt freeze crust, and big pile of facets. That's what formed up in our big drought period in January there, where we didn't get any snow for 2 weeks. And then below all this is like extremely well settled snow down to the ground. So below our Jan crust and the bottom like 2 meters of our snowpack, super well settled and well bonded. And yeah, we'll just get right into it. So I'd say probably the biggest player in our kind of largest avalanches that we've seen in the last few weeks, and we've got quite a few fun avalanche photos to show you guys tonight. The main culprit of a lot of these has been this January 26th surface ore melt freeze crust and facet combo, which, like I said, formed up during our 2-week drought period through January, which I'm sure we all remember well. So we had no snow for 2 weeks there. Right prior to that, we had a big rain event, basically right to ridgetop, and we had this like pretty burly crust form up all the way into the Alpine. We traveled around on that for a couple of weeks, and at the same time, we had like quite significant surface ore growth. If anyone was out and about, there was like surface ore up to like 50 mils. It was absolutely gigantic, and that was widespread right from peak to creek. The other thing that happened at that time is below that really thick crust. Probably the 20 to 30 centimeters of snow below that became quite heavily faceted. So that's that like really weak, sugary grain snow, the type of stuff that doesn't want to stick together to make a snowball, formed up below that crust. And then at this point, now it's been buried for almost 6 weeks at this point. That we've been talking about this layer daily. The times that I've dug down to it in the last couple of weeks, we're often seeing that thick crust is basically faceted right out. And it's not actually, it's hard now to distinguish between crust and the pile of facets that's below it. So in general, now that layer presents is just like a really thick layer of faceted snow. That's about 30, 40 centimeters thick. It produced quite a few historic avalanches up to size 4. Again, I'll show you some photos in a little bit. But we had 2 pretty significant avalanche cycles in the last 3 weeks. And when we were looking on the InfoX, or Information Exchange, which is this awesome platform that all avalanche professionals are sharing observations on, there was more than one day where people's avalanche summaries just said widespread reactivity to size 4, which is like not something we see very often. But that almost became normal for a few days to be reading that, which just speaking lots. It was like all aspects, all elevation, this thing running full path, taking out mature timber everywhere. And this January 26th crust has been the culprit for the biggest of the avalanches that we've seen. Lots of skier triggered avalanches with it as well. Many of those were remotely triggered, standing on an area here, causing a failure of the snowpack and then triggering an avalanche on the base of the slope. Helicopter remotes were pretty common, lots of explosive triggered avalanches. And at this point in our snowpack, we're finding that down about 1.5 meters to 220 centimeters. So it's getting quite deep down there, which is going to translate perfect. As Shena's talk later about like how deep does it actually need to be for us to trigger it as a human. Yeah, that's the big setup for our January 26th, and that's a photo of some surface ore with the faceted snow around it. Next up on the list, we've got that February combo, 7th, 9th, 13th. I think there was even a 15th. Like I said, this period where we're getting some cool, clear nights with the high humidity, which was allowing the surface ore to grow on the top of the snowpack. We had a couple really sunny days that made the moist snow on the solar aspects that froze up and formed quite a thick sun crust. It's a little tricky to see in this photo. But that's that January 26th surface ore down there, or faceted snow. This is a big sun crust. I think we called that one the Feb 7th. And then there's even another surface ore line right here. So just that general 30, 40 centimeters apart, we had a handful of weak layers. It also produced a lot of skier triggered and natural avalanches up to size 3 and 4. And with all these avalanches, it kind of didn't really matter what layer was going on. So an interesting thing that's been happening, and I don't know if people have been seeing this, is where some of these avalanches have gone, the slab is actually pulled back into like very low angle terrain. People have seen photos of that, we're kind of observed that in the field. I've got a couple to show you later on. But we're seeing where the classic spots you'd expect to see large avalanches, but that slab actually pulling back into like 20-degree or lower terrain above that. A little bit of what's going on there is as the snow continued to settle over these weak layers, that slab that was sitting on top of them became so dense that when it was breaking, it was actually just pulling back into low angle terrain, because there was so much cohesion there. So we saw that quite a bit, like I said, pulling back into like 20-degree terrain. So it's pretty interesting in some ways, definitely like uneasy and spooky out there, but pretty interesting. And now with our snowpack, we're finding these guys down like anywhere from 1 meter to 1.5 meters. You can find evidence of these weak layers in there. So we'll talk about, a couple of really big avalanche cycles we had, and then we're going to get into a little bit of like kind of strategies and techniques, like what conversations we're having in guys meeting these days, and generally how we were approaching the mountains. So through late February there, we had pretty steady snowfall, lots of convective flurries, just something I'll touch on a little bit later. Classic spring weather, where we get those like intense snow showers for half an hour, and you get a few centimeters out of it, and then it's sunny the next 10 minutes. But there was really 2 quite significant storms. Like February 25th and 26th, we had about 20 to 30 centimeters of snow hitting the Alpine. And then on February 27th, we had a climax avalanche cycle, is what we heard it get called. So we had like widespread activity, almost every avalanche path that could go was running, and a lot of them are running like into mature timber further than they've run in the last like 50 years, with the age of those trees that they're pulling out of there. Running right from valley top or ridge top to valley bottom. Has anybody walked up Knott Creek in the last month and seen some of these debris piles? this is the Grizzly Path, and the repile there. This happened on Feb 27th. It was quite a notable day. I think it was like Grizzly Slide Path, one of the North Cheops ones, like the ramparts up in the Assault in there. Lots of these went size 4, and some of them got up to like 10 meters plus of debris in the creeks at Valley Bottom. I saw on one of the min reports that there's 3 of them that'll happen in the Assault Valley at the same time that they were observed by a human, which I can't imagine what that sounded and felt like out there. But yeah, for this one day, we had a ton of massive avalanches. Like I said, that's Grizzly Slide Path. And that's some more photos of the Grizzly Slide Path there. I'm sure people have made it look a little different now. This is teddy bear trees. That's like the little shoulder that you can see out to exit. That's usually quite nice. Just got rolled over, which is quite impressive because there's actually like quite a piece of terrain that blocks you from the main slide path there. And also where the Grizzly up track goes, it came up and over that ridge and like spilled into Grizzly trees itself and made like a new avalanche path in the trees. So quite impressive avalanche activity out there. Definitely a time to be not walking up Knob Creek. And yeah, just massive debris piles. So I'm curious, kind of thinking about this last 3 weeks. Skiing was really awesome. I'm sure we're all hearing the messaging coming through social media and from guides and other friends out there, like, hey, it's like really heads up hockey right now. Quite spooky, but there's some really good skiing to be done. So it was quite difficult to kind of walk that line. I'm wondering if did anybody feel like the public avalanche bulletin was under calling the hazard at all? See a shake of the head back there, nod of the head. Did anyone feel like, hey, they're calling it considerable right now when I'm actually treating the terrain differently than if it's considerable because we've just got 30 centimeters of new snow, kind of your standard snowfall? Totally. I saw some comments about that on social media, and I like totally agree with it. Some kind of classic things that were getting said in guys' meetings the last week or 3 weeks have been like, we're calling it like it's 3, but we're going to treat it like it's 4. Or we're calling it 2, but we're going to treat it like a 3, or it's a hot 3, or whatever you want to call it. So I just wanted to throw it out there and kind of remind people that the avalanche hazard that we see rated in the forecast is not based off our feelings of like how scared we are that day or how spooked or whatnot. They're all based off like strict definitions of what avalanche activity we're seeing, what size it is, and how easy or difficult it is for us to trigger that, or the type of natural activity we're seeing. So we can kind of look at all these charts and tables and line those up and come up with the numbers, and we do need to call it how we're seeing it. And you can have considerable, you can have size 3s, size 4s happening in isolated areas, or you could be dealing with, a considerable hazard where we get 30 centimeters of new snow in January or December, and it's just falling on old soft snow, and we deal with the storm slide for a couple of days. That's kind of reactive. Where this was like a very sustained period of considerable or higher, and the consequences generally feeling quite a bit higher than they would in a classic storm cycle. So yeah, like I said, calling it 3, treating it as if it's 4. That was a really common thing for us to say in the last couple of weeks. And again, if you look at the definitions of what considerable avalanche hazard actually means, it still is dangerous avalanche conditions. The most avalanche fatalities occur when the hazard is at considerable or at 3. And when we step into like 4 and 5, it becomes quite obvious that it's dangerous out there. Like now being a prime example, not a lot of people going in avalanche during the last couple of days. Also because of the ski quality might have something to do with that. But it's still telling us that natural avalanches are possible and a human triggered avalanches is likely. So at 3, I'm still like, there's a good chance that I'm going to go out there and trigger an avalanche today. And then when we look at the sizes, we got small avalanches all over the place, which would be like your size 1, 1.5. Large avalanches, mostly all over the place in specific areas. So your size 2, 2.5. And then you can still have very large avalanches in isolated areas. Your size 3s and 4s can totally still happen at considerable. And it just felt like a much different considerable than it often does around here. And then looking at high, which is where we're rated at today. I'm sure lots of people, a little spoiler alert for the end, but we're all well aware. Very dangerous avalanche conditions. Natural are likely, human are very likely, and we're going to have big avalanches all over the place. So just like a little bit of context as to maybe if there was a bit of confusion or thoughts the last couple weeks why the hazard wasn't rated any higher. So yeah, like I was kind of talking about, it was quite a challenging month. The last 4 weeks or so dealing with these persistent weak layers. There was a lot of days where it felt like, you know, you're walking a bit of a fine line out there. And I'm curious to hear from some of you guys. We'll get there in a minute. Yeah, quite a challenging month. We had 5 fatalities in Western Canada in the last month, actually. Started right back to when we talked last. 3 of those involved persistent weak layers, or February or January persistent weak layers. There was a lot of close calls in the last month. The InfoX, again, the information exchange, most days would have somebody that went out there and remote triggered a big avalanche or had a close call in types of terrain that aren't always the most obvious pieces of avalanche terrain. Something we said a lot is like, we were skiing around on a bit of a house of cards. And it was getting really tricky. Because it felt like there was a lot of times where you could go ski a steeper open slope in the trees and totally get away with it and get this like false positive feedback that you're making good decisions. And then we come home, look at the InfoX and see like, you know, the neighboring 10 years, somebody remoted the exact same piece of terrain basically that we were skiing that day. So it was like quite tricky that way. So what do you guys think? Like, what are some strategies and tools that you guys use or can think of to like safely operate in the backcountry when we're dealing with this more low to mid probability but high consequence avalanche hazard?
Focus on simple terrain.
Focus on simple terrain. What does that look like to you?
I mean, definitely lower angle, probably under 30 degrees. But with some of the things that we were seeing in the main reports, like there was even persistent weak slides happening for about 30 degrees. So that wasn't like good. Broken up terrain that, you know, avoiding terrain traps, avoiding anything that if an avalanche did happen, would go, you know, much above the size of the
Yeah, that's an awesome answer. Anybody else? Anybody use anything at home that maybe like makes their decision making a bit easier once they get in the field? Because it gets a 30-degree slope and a 34-degree slope look pretty similar when the skiing's awesome. Or like a 34 and a 38-degree slope are pretty darn similar when the skiing is really good. Anyone have any thoughts along that line? Like trip planning tools, things they're using to like try and make some of these decisions at home before you even have to get there and like judge a slope angle and deal with the tile prop?
Granite.
Yeah, granite maps, totally. I got a little example coming up. I'm a big fan of the granite mapping application, but like your Gaia, Fat Map used to be more of a thing, like Outmap's another really good one, Google Earth. There's lots of ways where you can be sitting at home and flash up all these avalanche terrain overlays or slope angle overlays and get a really good picture of what we're actually planning on going into before we even get there. So something that we do in the guiding world, and this kind of concept that I've been thinking a lot more, you know, I'm still an apprentice ski guide fairly early in my career. It's something that I'm learning to do a lot more of and really appreciate when this works. It's like setting myself up for easy wins in the day. If I only have to make simple decisions, like, yeah, let's ski this 30-degree terrain, and I just completely avoid all of the big gnarly overhead and the weird slopes where I'm like, maybe I could ski it, maybe I didn't. Like those are quite challenging decisions to make, especially in the environment that we try and make them in. So I just set a bunch of boundaries right at the start of the day, and we say like, okay, I'm not going to ski anything over 35 degrees today. I'm not going to walk under any big overhead pass that can make a size 3 or size 2 even. When I get out there, it's like easy. I've already made those decisions. I'm going somewhere that I'm just not putting myself in a position to have to think that hard. And then when I go out there all day, it's easy decisions. My brain gets less tired. We just generally have more fun because I'm not scared and stressed all day and like walking this fine line. And I'm just really trying to like increase my margins. So like not totally walking the line. Like just because you can doesn't mean you should. It was something I was thinking about the last couple of weeks as well. Like sure, we probably could get away with this, but if I get it wrong, like we're gonna have a 1.5 meter deep crown in the middle of the forest, and it's gonna be a big problem. So generally staying on the more conservative side. And what we do in the guiding world is every day we do a run list. So this is an example from Monashee Powder Snowcats. We do the same heli skiing, and it's the part of our meeting that we always spend the most time talking about and doing is making this run list. It can be a bit laborious sometimes, and we get into some funny debates. But basically, we have 3 options when we're leaving or setting ourselves up for the day. So we can open a run and have it green, which means open for guiding. It does not mean that run is like totally good to go. You still need to make your decisions. You might see some notes like this run is green, but the big open slope, we're going to stay away from that. So, a run in our context can be quite wide, where you can get a few groups down there and everybody's getting fresh tracks. So there's ways to work these runs. We can have red, and once we make something red, it is then closed for the whole day. So we can't go out there and then change that decision midway through the day because it's better than we thought, or the sun came out and we're all stoked and we want to go to the Alpine. So we're kind of like setting ourselves some boundaries at the start of the day, lines that we're not going to cross. We can also use yellow, which you see a bit of on there. And yellow always has some very specific caveat to be met. Classic one is green. If the overhead hazard that we're worried about already avalanche natural, then we're feeling good. We can go in there and work in that terrain. But you can do a very similar thing at home. This is the granite that we were just talking about, granite mapping app. This is Connaught Creek right here, and this is just the avalanche terrain overlay. So it's a pretty quick glimpse. Hey, I'm planning on walking up that valley today, and I've got pretty significant overhead avalanche hazard everywhere around me. I can also use this to then look for the spots, lighter colors or no colors. And a little spoiler alert, if you're looking in Rogers Pass, there's not a ton of options for you, especially getting in and out of your valleys. They're very similar tools that you can use at home and kind of set up just different context things, like using the terrain itself. Like you said, identifying simple terrain. On Avalanche Canada, you can go on their trip planner and actually have the overlay, that avalanche terrain exposure scale, and it'll just show you what is simple terrain and what is challenging, what is complex, and you're like, okay, well, that's pretty cut and dry. I'll just go play in the simple terrain today. So just a bit of a way to use some other tools at home. Yeah, like we talked about, like terrain is the absolute most important factor in the last kind of month, and will be kind of moving forward so for the next couple of days. If I'm not skiing an avalanche terrain, I'm not going to trigger an avalanche. It might not be the most exciting skiing sometimes, but understanding the difference between what a 38-degree slope looks like and a 33-degree slope looks like. Much difference in our ability to trigger an avalanche. But a 33-degree slope still skis really awesome in the right kind of conditions. And the other big one that you mentioned there as well that's awesome is just like the more broken up terrain or like disconnected terrain. Something we've been saying a lot of the last month is we're avoiding these like large connected slopes. So if that slope itself is capable of making a size 2 avalanche, I was just not skiing it. Because if I was wrong, I was going to make a size 2. And it was going to be a meter deep on one of these surface ore layers. It was going to be a big problem. So if it was capable of doing it, we just weren't skiing it. Sort of just like picking fights with the small guys at the bar instead of going in there and picking fights with all the big guys. Fortunately for us, the last few weeks, the skiing was really good, and the skiing in the low angle alpine was awesome. So if you've ever thought that like sometimes heli skiers, all we do is go out and like schnoodle on the glaciers, you're absolutely correct for a week there. The ski thing was really good. I was on like 25-degree terrain. I was traveling fast. I had no overhead hazard the whole time. I could just go out and like point shoot and not even think about avalanche hazards. So those days when that worked out for us, it was just like a really nice mental break. And we're not just like in there walking around the White Dragon all day. We could just set up. People are super happy. The skiing's really fun. Using a lot of our good travel habits. So those things we learned in our AST ones, are putting way more space on slopes than I might normally in between skiers. Thinking a lot about where I was regrouping. We'll talk a bit about it in Shena's talk, but as these layers get deeper and deeper, they need a larger and larger trigger to be able to actually make these things go. And when I'm heli skiing, I can often have 11 people with me plus myself, so we're 12 people. And our weight is often like 24 or 2,500 pounds as a group. So we're a pretty significant load on a slope, way different than just 2 people standing there. So I was thinking a lot about where I was regrouping and bringing 11 people together and making really sure I didn't have any big terrain above me, or even with how we were seeing the slabs pulling the low angle terrain, I wasn't going to go regroup right on the edge of a convexity because we were seeing a lot of those pull back behind. So I was stopping a little bit further back and just being really conscious about where I was collecting my people. Skiing things one at a time, watching my overhead hazard, like I just mentioned, was a really big one. And if it was going to be gray and bad viz out there, making sure I had a good look on some imagery before I go in there, just to know where those places are going to be. Checking in with my partners, and for me, that was my guiding team. And more of that was like just checking in that we're on the same page going out the door today. Like, hey, we're keeping it really conservative. Let's have really good communication. If you're getting lumps over there or you remote a pocket, like these are things I want to know about right away. So we're just making sure that we're all playing the same game, we're all pulling the rope in the same direction out there. Also just like shredding the steel is really awesome when the hazard is like this. Like it was quite tricky, and it was like I mentioned, a bunch of times we're walking the line pretty thin out there. So when you can just go to the steel and not ski with the backpack and like be responsible to smash POW, that's pretty darn fun. Right on. Any questions there, thoughts? Anyone else have any?
So you have your body that's the new salt with solid slits?
Yeah.
So are you satisfied to see like fresh added debris that's not covered in fresh snow, anything for crimes, and what's your checklist for has this still be submitted?
Totally. Yeah, great questions. He's asking like, for moving yellow to green, if the caveat was the overhead activity, like what does that look like? Sometimes you might say like, we want to see it go size 2.5, or like, you know, get a good enough clean out of the start zone and that's not going to hit our pickup or affect our ski line or something like that. But definitely paying attention to like how much new snow is on the debris is a really good thing to be looking at. You know, if it didn't snow the night before and we get out there and there's a fresh pile of debris, then that's great. We're pretty sure that happened yesterday. Opposed to we get out there and the debris's got 10 centimeters on it, then maybe we knew fell a few days ago. So it's definitely something we're looking at. It's more a little more specific feature by feature what you're actually looking for. We were also doing a lot of explosives control work the last couple of weeks. And for us, heli skiing, that was much less protecting the actual ski lines that we're skiing. It was more protecting our pickups. Especially for us, we have a pocket in the Selkirks, which is awesome skiing. We ski in a lot of big avalanche paths out there, and we also pick up at the bottom of a lot of big avalanche paths because there's usually no trees and it's quite flat, and it's like a great place to pick up in a helicopter. But we're super exposed when you got 12 people getting in and out of a machine, and the thing is running, you can't hear or see what's going on around you. So we're doing a lot of explosives work and protect our pickups. And interestingly enough, just to kind of like add to the whole, you know, confusion and complexity of it all. We'd go out there with like 20 bombs in the helicopter and being like, we're gonna get 20 ripper avalanches, and we get like 6. And you're like, a lot of no results. And you're like, it was like made it harder. It's like definitely does not mean it's good to go. It actually means we probably put the bomb in the wrong spot. Or that's more what we're thinking. Like things were definitely like guilty until proven innocent. And a lot of the ways for it to do that was for it just to have a big avalanche. So it's quite interesting with the explosive work and also just like, you know, being in a guys meeting where we've got 10 guys in there, there's like almost 100 years of guiding experience in the room, and even the most experienced guys being like, I don't know. Like, I don't know when we open a run to green, unless we get some control work in there. Like, there's a lot of head scratching going on, which is quite interesting to see, even from myself up to, you know, the 40 year guys. Everyone was like kind of scratching their head a little bit and being very tentative about being the person to start stepping out and like working in the bigger thing. Anything else before we kind of move forward a little bit?
How far back on that low angle stuff did you see avalanche?
I've got a great photo to show you towards the end. An avalanche that happened up at the blankets, and I was up there last. And like it pulled well into like 15 degree terrain, like probably 20, 30 meters behind the edge of some pillows. Like, so like dimension wise, a size 2, but then if you consider volume for how deep those were and the kind of screen that was in, were like 2.5 in the middle of the forest and big pillows and unsupported above the cliff sort of thing. Yeah, far enough to be thinking about it. Our joke was that you weren't allowed to go stand at the end of a pillow and look at your line. You're gonna hit it. You have to go full speed ahead and not hang out on there. Cool. So
Good guy.
we had all that going on for a few weeks, and then I guess like a week, 10 days ago or so, we had kind of one of our next big significant changes that really changed the structure of our snowpack, which was March 6th and 7th. It rained fairly high, about 2,000 meters, 2,200 meters. We had some rain falling. Actually, I was skiing that day. By some miracle, we were flying helicopters and skiing around, but it was like very heavy, light concretes, and we ended up calling the ski program because it was just too hazardous for people's knees, really. And we were like, it was unskiable below like 1,700 meters that day. It was quite like the cement mixer in there. But as that storm finishes, it actually just kind of turns right from rain into snow, which is really good for new snow bonding on a crust. The longer a crust just sits on the surface and gets exposed to clear weather, we get more surface ore growth or more fastening going on there. So kind of our best case scenario is for it to just turn right into snow, which is what happens. It buried that crust on March 8th, and that crust got pretty rock solid up to about 2,000 meters over the next couple of days. You know, on like March 9th, we were skiing below 1,700 meters, and we kind of had 20 centimeters of dust on crust. And then by like Monday last week, we were skiing back down to like 1,400 meters again, had about 60 centimeters on the crust, and we really weren't feeling it anymore. So it actually came around quite quickly. Which is hopefully what we've got to store over the next few days. A lot of that snow that came last week was through these convective flurries. That's like a kind of a classic line you're going to see in weather forecasts as we move into the spring here. So what we're talking about with convective flurries is just the sun comes out in the spring, and the sun packs like a really serious punch right now. And by the process of convection, hot air wants to rise. Especially if that's going into a really moist, humid atmosphere, you're going to get these like short-term but really intense snowfalls is usually what happens. Often you get a lot of gravel, that snow that actually kind of feels like hail. It's quite classic with a convective storm. Or the snowflakes look like really small and beat up. They're not like your classic picturesque big snowflakes that we get in like more in December. So we get a lot of those, and you might get intense snowfall, like I said, 20, 30 minutes, and then it'll be sunny for 20, 30 minutes, and then you'll be back in the whiteout, can't see anything. So that was a really common cycle. The last week, which was great because it was just topping us up. All those convective storms were like really low density, so that made the skiing really awesome. And that crust now exists to about 2,000 meters. And when you're below tree line, my last pit that I dug would have been right near the chalet, which is like 1,800 meters. That crust was like 10 centimeters thick and as hard as that table that your beer's sitting on right now. It was rock solid. So that was good for us in terms of thinking about some bridging strength above our weak layers that are below the March 8th crust. So anything, our Feb layers and our January 26th below tree line, we were starting to feel a bit more comfortable because we've got this like rock solid cap on top of that. We did pretty quickly start to see avalanches running on our March 8th crust. Actually, this is a good little video from the blanket the other day. We're like walking through the meadows, it's sunny and beautiful, and then we're just like walking towards this wall of gray. So that's like a very classic convective setup and what that's gonna kind of look and feel like out there. And then, 10 minutes later, that wall's behind us and we're in the sunshine over here. So it's like quite dynamic weather. We're back to our March 8th crust. So now we're finding that down anywhere from like 60 to 100 centimeters. Like I said, it goes up to about 2,000 meters. And I'm really only thinking it's got solid bridging strength more on that like 1,700 meters and lower, where I can like observe that it's really thick and feel good about its bridging properties there. I was seeing some faceted snow grains right on top of that crust. So this is definitely going to be something I'm sure that's been reactive in the last couple of days. It's not a crust that would have like broken down and washed away. I'm sure there's plenty of avalanche activity on it. I just haven't really been out there to check out for myself the last couple of days. And then this avalanche happened. This was a helicopter remote, so we just landed at a pickup. Actually, the pickup's at like 2,100 meters. About 100 meters below us. After we lifted off, we noticed we had triggered this avalanche, which was kind of interesting. It was like probably our 8th time picking up there that day. Like it was definitely not the first time we landed a group there. Very wind-loaded spot, kind of a classic shallow, wind hammered area. But we were suspecting that went on the March 8th crust. I asked ChatGPT to ask, like, what would the skiing look like right now, and that's what it gave me. It's pretty accurate. Cool. So now we'll talk about like what's going on there right now, what has happened the last couple of days, and hopefully what's to come for us in the next few days. So it's raining a lot. There's no secrets there. From most accounts, it's rained like almost to ridgetop. There's maybe spots in the Alpine once you get over 2,300 meters, but there's still some dry snow out there. But it's quite saturated. Below 2,200 meters, it's like the upper 40 to 50 centimeters of the snowpack is super wet. There's no denying that. And we've had an ongoing natural avalanche cycle the last few days up to size 4 again. So another massive test for our persistent weed glares that are buried. And personally, I think if there is like a silver lining to this storm, we've had 2 really significant storms on those weed glares, 2 big cycles, and now we have like the final like finish it. Right at the end, you know, like this is about as big of a load that you can test a persistent weed glare with. It's like a bunch of rain right to the top. We're staying above 0 degrees overnight. So like, you know, after this one, feeling pretty good about walking under some overhead hazard once the temps cool down. And I think hopefully we'll have flushed out a bunch of these big paths, and that's actually going to set us up well for the spring here. So that's a potential silver lining there. But yeah, we did go back to I was seeing on the InfoX, we got a lot of size 4s from yesterday, and things running full path. The forecaster messages the last few days, and we've been keeping up and look at them. They're not trying to hide anything. We've had a lot of big avalanches. We're just avoiding avalanche terrain. They will be large and run full path. Rogers Pass the last 2 days just saying like straight up, that's just not a good time to be in the backcountry. You're not lying. It's almost nice that the skiing sucks. It's not like you feel like you're missing out on anything right now. And that was their one from yesterday. It's ugly out there, heavy rain, soaked snow, large destructive avalanches, breaking trees, and it's been a great time. We've had a great sauna steam room session at the pool today. It's an excellent place to find yourself right now. Okay, so what's coming? It's not over yet, I promise. We will ski soft snow again this year, and I think we'll ski it pretty soon. We just had a phone call with the guys that are at the blanket right now and got like a live 6 p.m. update, what they got up to up there today and what they were seeing. So today they actually skied. They got up to about 2,300 meters, and they found that in the Alpine they had like a very robust crust already forming there. So it was quite windy, so most of that new snow has blown away, and they found their best skiing at high tree line, where there was still a crust and a bit of new snow that hadn't been affected by the wind too bad. But they actually like stayed out most of their day today, so they must have been finding some reasonable skiing. Our temps are forecasted to cool pretty quickly over the next few days. That's obviously going to be our saving grace and turn this rain into snow. But what's going to happen is we're going to get a new crust that's going to develop here. Already is developing up high. So a few things that I'll be thinking about, especially when this crust is close to the surface and we get a chance to kind of watch it form and develop. How high does that crust extend into the Alpine? Especially if we start thinking about this new crust potentially being like quite thick and robust, and now potentially bridging over a lot of the weed layers that we're dealing with. There may end up being an elevation band where that crust doesn't exist anymore. And once you cross above that, you'll be dealing with like the full winter snowpack again. Surface roughness might be a bit of a thing. Like I can imagine that trees are like a little bit of a war zone right now. There's a lot of snow on the trees when this warm up happens. So there's going to be like tree bombs and loose, wet, rough debris all over the place, which can lend itself to a bit better. It's better than snow falling on like a clean sheet of ice that's really smooth and uniform. So that potentially has some help for us. And how quickly it snows is going to be a factor as well. So we're forecasted, this is today, during the day, our big wet day, 8 mils overnight, and then kind of tapering off into the weekends. I think this one has the temperatures. So 2,400 meter temp or blue line by Friday afternoon, get into -5, -10, with only a little bit of snow. So best case for us is up high, it's like smooth and predictable, and we get 10 centimeters of snow on it, and we could be like skiing in the Alpine with good success in the next couple of days. What I will be watching out for is what that snow on top of the crust does, especially if it gets cold. That's when we land to getting more of that faceted snow. I think that's like potentially somewhat likely. When you get that thick of a crust as well, all of our moisture that's below that, which is going to be like a pretty significant amount, which you'll dig past that crust and find like 50 centimeters of really wet snow. All that moisture is trying to escape the snowpack, but it's going to be hitting this crust and getting stuck there, which is going to lead to more fastening going on top of that crust to get like quite a significant temperature gradient in a very small area. Where you get more fastening occurring. So I'm going to be paying attention, especially if that snow on the crust, get that like weak, sugary sensation there. When that gets big snowfall on it, we might spend a lot of time talking about our new March, whatever crust that we're going to call this thing. Paying a lot of attention to what's going on above the crust, but it does look like we're cooling off. These orange bars show some convective potential, which we'll take anything we can get over the next few days. So yeah, this is our latest update from the blankets, and this is what they wrote in their snowpack summary at the end of the day. This supportive rain crusts in the lower alpine, moderate to strong westerly winds, limiting the new snow accumulation up there. At 1 centimeter new snow over wet snow at tree line, and a saturated upper snowpack below 2100. Our March 8th down 60 to 90, and our Jan and Feb PWL is down 100 to 200. The other interesting thing you mentioned up there is in the last 2 days they've had 30 centimeters of settlement at the chalet, which is quite significant, which is just going to like settle that snow above our weak layers, actually like developing more of a slab, more cohesion. In the long term with it cooling off, that might actually set up well just for like a really dense, well settled snowpack when we get into moving into spring, thinking about like glacier travel and what coverage looks like out there. We should have a ton of snow. A lot of it is really well consolidated, so thinking about glacier travel and moving over crevasses like our snow bridges we're all set up to have like a pretty successful spring, which is great. And they found their best skiing today up in that upper tree line where the wind didn't ravage it too hard. So that's our breaking news from the field as of 6 p.m. today. Cool. So now we hopefully have like a bit of an understanding as to how we've got to where we are today, what we've dealt with the last little while. I've got some fun, large avalanche photos to share with you guys. We could probably just spend the whole night showing avalanche pictures, a lot of big ones from the last month, but some standout ones. This one for us, so this is in the CMH tenure in the Selkirks, so right in the McRae area, just south of McRae. This was quite an interesting one. This would have happened on February 28th. Would have been March 1st. It was kind of like 2 days after the really first big cycle that we saw on those crusts. And we went from big cycle, nice and warm, and it cooled off pretty drastically. And we were feeling like, okay, that was a pretty good cycle. There's no big weather inputs today. Not expecting to see any big naturals today. And then our snow safety guy went for a flight into the Selkirks just to have a look around. And this was a setup actually we could tell because it had snowed that night, like 5 to 10, and this pile of debris had no snow on it. So it occurred that morning. And this is in like the middle of the forest. This is like really good open tree line skiing, well-spaced trees, probably 35, 36 degrees. But we had like a 150 centimeter crown in the middle of the forest, which was pretty significant. This ran on the January 26th persistent weak layer, and you could like, the guy that observed it said even standing on the crown, you could just see the surface ore from the top. Like you didn't need a loop, it was gigantic. And that's like what those chunks of debris and slab debris looked like in the middle of the forest. So it was a size 3 in the middle of the trees, which stood out quite a bit for us. This video does a little bit better job. Like there's the crown right in there. But like in general, you might consider that somewhere you could go skiing on fairly high hazard and be like working that piece of terrain. So that was one of those examples where we're like, maybe starting to build a little bit of confidence, and then you see that. You know, like, well, there goes our hopes of skiing the big open blades. This one up from the blankets. This happened on March 4th. This was a natural trigger. Actually, likely got triggered by a tree moth. It's kind of the best guess up there. There have been some some snow coming off the trees, out of these like really steep little pillow pockets above that. It ran natural, down 80 to 100 centimeters. We were thinking this is on one of the February surface ore layers. And we even chatted with Marty, like it's not something that avalanches very often. It's something that doesn't produce avalanches like this very often. So that one stood out to us as well. This one's a little bit harder to see where exactly it was going on. This is one of the biggest ones that we saw within our CMH terrain. This is just north of Copeland, kind of in that neck of the woods towards Frisbee Creek. See a little bit, the crown extends there, goes around the corner, and then comes into this bowl as well. So we call this one a size 4. This one ran like into the trees past its historic runouts, which is kind of following this creek here, and the debris made it down into the forest. And actually you can see it ran uphill on this side fairly far, and it also triggered avalanches on the slope facing the other way. They're quite significant. We have like 3 pickups in there. They all got smoked, all the flags are gone, and a bunch of trees are gone as well. It's kind of funny. We've been meaning to get these trees cut out of here because it makes it hard for the helicopter to lift out of there, but that got taken care of it for us this year, so it was a little bit of a bonus on that one. And this is one that I was telling you about, like pulling back into some like quite low angle terrain. A little bit harder to see in the photo. That's the crown up there in the trees. So that's again like down 150 centimeters plus, and like where that fracture line is sitting is like almost flat. Yeah, like I'd say 10, 15 degrees as you're leading up to the edge of the pillows. That maybe helps show it a bit more. You can see like the density of that crown in like quite low angle terrain pulling back super far. I suspect that probably happened early March, like this had 30, 40 centimeters of snow on the debris. But again, it was just a good example of the type of terrain that was producing avalanches. I think this is the last one, but anybody recognize the spot?
McPherson.
McPherson, yeah. Yeah, like that's the burnt knob up there. You ever generally feel like pretty safe walking on that road down at the bottom of McPherson? Like you feel like there's a lot of space between you and the big terrain up there. But that road actually got hit in one of those big cycles, which I thought was pretty amazing. Like I walked up that road many times. I've never seen debris get there. So I ran like size 3.5. I'd be pushing size 4 again. A big debris right to the valley bottom. Cool. So now you kind of know why we have the layers that we have, and what we're going to set up for moving forward here. This will soon turn into a new crust layer, likely already has. You're going to hear it called whatever, March 19th, melt freeze crust or rain crust. And that's going to be the main kind of thing on my mind moving forward for the next few days. And like we talked about, watching what the new snow is doing on top of that crust. Going to be the thing I'll be paying the most attention to. Okay. We're going to move on to like what is the avalanche hazard right now, and we'll just go through the forecast together, and then I'll kind of wrap up towards the end of that. But any questions so far on anything we've already talked about?
I'm curious, it seems like obviously there's that surface core layer that's at below tree line. Is this stuff that's running in in the high alpine, is that running on buried facets, or is that kind of like a storm slab that then is like stepping down and tree line down the surface core?
Totally, great question. So yeah, lots of surface core avalanches, tree line and below for sure. The ones that we're seeing up in the big alpine features, I think most often we're going on that faceted layer, that Jan 26, especially as that crust broke down more and more and just turned into more facets. We tend to see less surface ore actually get preserved in the alpine. Like once it grows, it's quite delicate. So if you get a big windstorm, you'll blow a bunch of it away. If the sun comes out, you'll melt it. So it generally stays more protected in the trees. And then we also saw a lot of like wind and storm slabs starting in the alpine, and then once they gain enough mass, those stepping down to those deep layers. And once they hit that sweet spot elevation band, like the area of most concern for last month was like 2,100 meters to 1,700 meters is where we're getting the most reactivity. So you get a big pile of debris rolling down there and then stepping down where it was preserved. So we saw quite a bit. But I think if you got a big persistent slab, probably in the alpine, it's that faster. So.
And I guess like to follow up, is most of that like Has it been running on those facets in the Alpine?
I think so. And what's interesting, if you're like kind of diving in a little bit deeper with this faceted snow versus like an avalanche that happens on surface ore, often like when surface ore avalanche occurs, that surface ore is like a stack of dominoes, it all falls over, and you're kind of like dealt with the problem there. It's not going to go on surface ore again in the same spot. But with this faceted snow, we've definitely seen like reloaded bed surfaces. So the same thing, avalanche twice, because there's so much facets left over. Like it's not like the surface ore that once it goes, it just takes all of it with it, especially when you have like 40 centimeters of faceted snow. And then if you're like really diving deep into it, like once you have an avalanche going facets and there's facets left over, they're just gonna continue to facet even faster because it's like this shallow layer of snow exposed to the air elements again, especially if it's cold out. So we've seen like reloaded bed surfaces go in the Alpine, which would all make me kind of like think that we're dealing with the facets out there.
You're talking about like sticking to lower angle terrain or like smaller slopes or broken up slopes. Are those kind of like separate tools? Like you're talking about Alpine, like would you feel more comfortable skiing like a more connected slope at lower angle and like vice versa? If you're maybe going a little steeper, you want to start getting like more disconnected.
Totally. I think you're right on the money there. Like it's, I guess you think of like, stacking the odds in your favor. It's like you said, if I'm gonna go ski something connected, like let's back off the slope angle, which for us was like the big glacier Schnitzel Fest, which was great. Or say, okay, if I'm gonna step out a little bit and ski something a bit more steep, I want to make sure that I can't make a size 2 there, and I'm probably also gonna ski it one at a time. Especially as these things got deeper and deeper, they got harder and harder to trigger. So I'm feeling pretty good about maybe setting 8 skier down there at a time, but like we're not gonna all 8 of us just like rip this thing at the same time and be a bit more conscious. So yeah, they're separate, but like I think you nailed the scale there. The more connected, the lower angle is going. Because once you're under 30 degrees, 25 degrees, you can be as connected as you want. You're very low angle terrain.
You haven't discussed aspect at all. So like what case the slope, what case the slope, are you finding that everything's staying the same on all aspects, or are you seeing different?
Great question. Good thoughts. Yeah, so it's talking about like, I haven't actually said much about aspect, but you're totally right. It's like generally speaking, it was around the roads. We're seeing it on all aspects. And there were certain aspects that were producing more avalanches, and I think that came down to like a little bit of like very valley specific characteristics. Like in the Monashees, so in general, over the last month, we saw more reactivity in the Selkirks than we did in the Monashees. Selkirks also has more big connected steep avalanche paths that run all the way than the Monashees, generally speaking. And the Monashees have some more like benchy style terrain where I can work that because now I'm not skiing a huge slide path. Like for example, in the Monashees where I was skiing a lot of, for some reason we're seeing more avalanches on east aspects than others. A lot of those east aspects sit right above big bodies of water like lakes and creeks, so they're like classic surface ore farm areas. So I think that was specific to where we were skiing. If you're in your piece of terrain, you got a big lake on a west facing slope, you get all that classic surface ore. I was generally judging terrain the same. And like with the amount of like surprises that was going on and big avalanches getting triggered all over the place, I was like personally not hanging my hat on feeling really good about a certain aspect. It was just like giving it a general kind of all the same. But we did see where I was seeing like the east aspects were the most reactive. Yeah. All right. Okay, we'll move forward here. So we'll just go through the avalanche forecast and what it is right now and what Avalanche Canada is saying for us. So forecaster message here, just saying, so this is came out at 4 o'clock today, valid until 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. We have another day of avoiding all avalanche terrain. Tomorrow's kind of our last big, warm, wet, weathery day before things are really going to change. And we're going to be living in a new world in like 48 hours when it comes to avalanche hazard. Avalanches could be very large and run full path. If there's one saving grace going for like tomorrow and the next couple days, I bet you 90 90% or more of the avalanches that are gonna happen already have in the last 2 days. But I would not be hanging out in some big avalanche path tomorrow. I don't know, did that. I might need a.
I can do that.
So yeah, for tomorrow, they've got us at high, high, and high. All elevations, 4, 4, and 4 across the board. And we go to the next one there, Marty. And then looking at into the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, hazard generally trending down. Thoughts as to why? It's gonna get colder. Yeah, for sure. All that moist snow is gonna like firm right up. And the other word that the blanket guy, Adam Zoff, used in our phone call, he said like things are feeling really locked up high. Where that crust has already started to form, things are feeling really tight, which is great. So as that cools, we're gonna see avalanche hazard go down. And then they have a couple avalanche problems for us. So they have one as a storm slab. We've got all elevations and all aspects. Personally, I think where you're gonna find like a true storm slab right now is gonna be in the Alpine. You can have some dry snow behaving as a slab. But they're all elevations, all aspects. They've got it at very likely and up to size 3. Natural storm slabs could initiate high elevations and run into below tree line. They could also step down to our very deep layers. You know, like we already talked about. We're expecting to see that tomorrow. And then the other one they have on for us tomorrow is our persistent slab. And what Avalanche Canada and Rogers Pass have both done at this point, they've taken all 3 or 4 of those layers, the Febs and the Januaries, and they put it into one avalanche problem. Just to kind of keep it a little bit simpler for us. They've got an alpine and tree line, so they've actually removed it from below tree line, likely due to that March 8th crust being quite thick and robust down there. All aspects, likely chance of avalanches, and then up to size 4 on the big end here. So that's like mowing into big timber, running full path. And they have multiple beat weak layers, up to 2.5 meters, continue to produce big avalanches. So their terrain and travel advice for tomorrow is just to avoid exposure to overhead terrain. Avalanches are running really far right now. Avoid avalanche terrain during periods of heavy loading. So if it's like extra rainy or extra windy or extra snowy. Be aware of potential large avalanches due to very weak layers, and avoid traveling on slopes below cornices. Something else actually that's a good reminder that's been going on the last few weeks with this like steady snow and steady wind, the cornices have gotten pretty gigantic out there. I would imagine a lot of those probably failed in the last couple of days, but even with this warm, wet weather coming through, we'll see cornices develop quite a bit in the next couple of days. And our avalanche summary is something that we haven't already talked about. Lots of big avalanches, like I said, up to size 4 yesterday. Lots of them in the 2.5 to 3 range. And looking forward to kind of Thursday and Friday, expecting this will continue until the temps really cool off for us. And our weather summary, which we already did look at a bit. Thursday night, tonight being kind of the last night of the big rain. So 10 to 20 mils again tonight. The spot's up to 30. That's going to be putting us into like well over 100 mils freezing total for this storm, which is very significant. Average freezing level 2,100 meters. And then you see that going down over the next few days. And then by Sunday, they're talking about tree line temps of -7. So we'll be living in this will be living in the past, and we'll be bumping around in the trees on a bit of a firm surface and hopefully shoot for the alpine in the next couple of days. I think is where you'll be able to find the best skiing once it clears up. And then just to finish them off, they do always put a confidence in their forecast. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, you find it there. It could be low, moderate, or high. They put it at moderate right now. They're just uncertain about forecast snowfall amounts and how our persistent leaf layers are going to react to this kind of weather. I bet you if you asked us any avalanche forecaster what's the confidence that there's going to be big avalanches right now, we would all say high. It's just more saying how big they're going to be, where they're going to be, and what exactly that's going to look like. So just a couple things to put in your ear as we wrap it up here. Snowpack's super dynamic right now, and things happen quite quickly in the spring, especially with our sun. That's like the kind of the biggest thing I think about as we move into the later parts of March and April. When the sun pops right now, it's really intense. So obviously make sure, remember to wear my sunscreen. but really thinking about what I'm standing below when the sun really pops out. Especially if it's like the first sun on some new snow. Like if we, magically get 30 centimeters in the next few days and it's cloudy, in the spring, that first time that sun's hitting that new storm snow, reactivity will almost always increase as that snow gets moist and gain some cohesion. Just being very aware of what's above me. As layers get deeper, these larger triggers are required. So thinking about things like cornices falling, a big group out there skiing around, or intense solar radiation. And as we enter our spring diurnals, we get into that phase where we're getting the big melts every day and a refreeze overnight. I'm being extra cautious if I don't get those refreezing temperatures overnight. If I'm staying above 0 degrees in the mountains for more than 24 hours, my hazard will also always increase. So as we move into that time of year, thinking about the quality of the refreeze I'm getting overnight. And it's not over yet. We've got a lot of good skiing left to do. I'm very optimistic. And I think we're set up for a good spring. Any questions, comments? Anyone have anything to share? You guys need a beer? Right on. Okay, well, thanks for your time, you guys. I really appreciate
Let's take 5 minutes. Grab yourself a beer, watch your break. And I forgot to mention this earlier, because of the Legion, respectfully, the Regis hat. And you guys will come back. She just got an amazing presentation. So, using a helicopter to access the mellow terrain. I don't know about you, but I don't do that recreationally that often. So much of what we do is evaluating walking up the valley bottom. As a ski tourer, that's the Rogers Pass. You're evaluating if you can walk up to get into like the Ursa Trees kind of thing. When hazard's high, you can kind of start looking at that stuff. But a pretty good indicator that things are going off is the fact that the road is still closed. So literally, nobody should be in avalanche terrain if the road's closed that much. And same thing with snowmobiling. A big part is, that access. Luckily in Revelstoke, we've got some amazing access points to get up high in that level terrain. And I think snowmobiling actually has a pretty sweet advantage when we have avalanche conditions like this, because you can get up in that alpine. You don't necessarily have to have the super steep stuff. But this next presentation is awesome from Shena. A little bit of background of Shena. To be a CAA professional member is a really hard thing to do as a ski guide, and you get a lot of experience. But what's really cool in the snowmobile world is like, it's probably really hard to get a lot of snow and mountain experience, because it's like this developing professional agency. And so you're also a CMBGA lead guide. And you guys are leading the charge in terms of the educational side of things. And just kind of break down the businesses, you guys. Soul Rides runs the avalanche skills training side of your guys' business. And then the guiding is the Mountain Stash Adventures. Based on Revelstoke, you guys have a vacation rental that you trips out as well. And when did you start your season this year?
November 17th.
And you roll until May?
We're going
June?
We're going to Alaska, so we're going until April 2nd.
Yeah. Super long season. Your head's in the snow the whole year long. And how many years have you been a CA professional member?
I got it this summer.
It's a huge deal. Congratulations. All right, put your hands together for Shena.
First time holding light. That's
You got it.
up here.
Up there.
Okay, cool. So my name is Shena, and I'm here tonight because I met Morgan, who was one of the founders of Stay with Snowpack. She was in my operations election program, and I thought what she was doing was really cool. So when I saw her at the city meetings and she invited me to present here, I said, heck yeah. I forgot to take into consideration that my season is 100% slalom, and I had no time to do this, so bear with me as we move through this presentation, so please. Full disclosure, like I just said, I didn't create this until about an hour ago.
Rock on.
So if you see me looking over at this gentleman over here, it's because I'm like, people here. He might come up and help, all right? So that's kind of what's going on with that. Also, in full transparency, I'm not a content specialist when it comes to how we stress the snowpack. Okay, there's no magic equation that I'm gonna give you. You can't go my weight plus my skis plus that weak layer means avalanche is gonna happen. That's not how this works. What I'm gonna give you, hopefully, is just some things to consider about how we stress the snowpack as individual users and as different groups. So with that, my focus will be a little bit more on those 4 persistent weak layers that Ben was talking about, because they are getting buried a bit deeper and they are getting a little harder to trigger. So I think they're a good focus when we talk about stress in the snowpack. All right, let's start off with this slide. If any of you guys are thinking of your ex or her, the meeting is over there. So I want to just make sure we're clear on the words I'm using so that you guys understand what I'm trying to convey. So when I'm talking about penetration, what I'm talking about is the actual visual impact you can see in the snow after you go through the snow. So whether it be skiing down and you go back into the car line, or if you're snowmobiling and you leave that trench, or if you have a crash and you leave that bog hole. That's what I mean by penetration. How deep did we make a mark in the snow? Okay? Not to be confused with extreme not to be confused with the actual stress that we put into the snowpack. So, like I said, the penetration is the mark we make. The stress is the unseen impact we put into the snow. All right. Every one of us impact the snow. We all add stress. That went too far. I want this one played.
Because you quick and try every guy.
No, I'm not. I'm trying to get it will play.
We'll try it. That'll try
There,
it.
push play there, yeah.
Wow, thanks, Marty. Or
There we go.
Yeah, so stress. This is an example of one of my mentors. He's doing a modified extended column test. So this is not your typical extended column test. He's modified the snowpack there to try and emulate a snowmobiler's stress into the snowpack. So when we're applying that stress, it has the potential to go down and touch the weak layer. That was fun. I'm just gonna let you guys watch this for a moment. This is a friend of mine, and as you can see, there's a loose avalanche there, and then there's some of it down.
Oh.
Cause the avalanche. So the initial ride down, you can see they're penetrating the snow, right? They're making their mark in the snow. But then their stress is going down into and signaling that weak layer and becoming the trigger of the avalanche. The reason it's important to kind of understand our penetration and our stress is because if we are doing those two things, we become the trigger. Why does it matter if we trigger an avalanche? Well, unfortunately, 90% of people who die or get caught in an avalanche and buried, they, unfortunately, 90% of us are our own triggers. So it's either me who triggered it or it's someone in my group who triggered it. Alright, so it's kind of important to know how deep I affect the snow or how deep my partner affects the snow. So before we go any further, look to your main riding partner beside you. Someone that you ski, snowboard, snowshoe, walk on the snow with, or look across there and make eye contact with a stranger, and think about penetration, stress, picture that person doing that. Keep it in your head. This is, oh, nice. This is my partner being very triggered.
Cool.
Yeah, I figured out our cat's the lightest snowmobile you can.
So we all apply pressure into the snowpack, and there, in this particular one, you think it's a storm slab, but look what happens. You guys see what happens there? What happens below it? Yeah, there's 2 layers. It steps down to a second layer. So the stress he added triggered the first persistent weak layer, which then triggered the second persistent weak layer. So it's interesting when you think about the stress we add to the snowpack. All right, before I go into a little bit of numbers and things that get a little bit, not confusing, but factual, I want to explain how I started this talk versus where I'm going with it. So, again, in full disclosure, that is me in all 3 flows. Which one do you think I'm comfortable in? Yeah. Here, I'm learning to skin. It's my first time ever.
Yeah.
Here, I've got a 12-kilogram bomb in my hand. And I'm on snowshoes. That's what I forgot. And then here I'm on a snowmobile. So when I started building this talk, I came out here and I was like, yeah, I'm going to explain why snowmobilers impact the snow, why our stress load goes so deep, and why we're so different than skiers. Because when I teach my AST courses, it's the first thing I talk to them about. I pull up the avalanche bulletin, and you know that little dial in the bulletin where it says likely to an avalanche? You ever picture that?
Mm-hmm.
You know, where it says like likely or whatever, possible, all that. My students I lose them because they start to fall asleep in the dials of likely. Yeah, but we're sledders. Think of how deep our impact goes versus other user groups. And I try and hammer it home to them that we're different. But as I built this talk an hour ago, I realized that I'm kind of the anomaly in this group. So I need to bring it together and consider the things that are the same for all of us when it comes to stress and trigger. So a couple of things that came to mind are stress goals, how deep our pressure goes into the snowpack, riding abilities. We all have different riding abilities, doesn't matter what you're on. And then something Ben talked about, ridging. All right? I'll get to that in a moment, but essentially our stress goal, the pressure we put into the snowpack, it doesn't go on forever and ever. It stops at a certain point. Sometimes it stops because our impact and penetration isn't deep. Sometimes it stops because there's some sort of bridge that doesn't allow it to go any further. Right, so I'm gonna get this, I'm gonna skip it. Nice. All right, so every user group adds stress to the snowpack. Let's pretend you are a skier, or a snowshoer, or a snowmobiler. We all add stress to the snowpack. Some of us weigh a bit more than others. And some of us ride differently. Do you guys see that video? You want to play it again quickly?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a stress bubble on a weak layer.
Exactly.
That little line.
That's what I'm going back. So let's pretend this is the weak layer. Right there. This person, they're about 1 foot down, their pressure goes that far. This person's skiing, and these aren't real, like, I don't know if that's real, it's just kind of how I picture it. Snowmobile, it's about 2. Then all of a sudden the snowmobile does something dynamic. And now it's stress bubble. Actually, it's that weak layer triggering the avalanche. So can you guys think about things that you do, however you recreate, that change how you affect the snow? What kind of movements do you do? Falling, falls, what else? Big turns. Yeah, you're not doing nice little butter, like smooth turns, you're doing big sharp turns.
Regrouping,
Sorry?
regrouping, it's all standing in the same spot.
Regrouping, yeah, so you got 9 clients standing in the same spot. Now you've got all that weight, even though your bubble might have been short and flat, it's short and flat and deep, or how much pressure you're putting into the snowpack. It's a great example. All right, so those are stress goals. That is potentially how much pressure we're putting into the snowpack. Now, again, user groups. I was gonna pick on sledders because we impact the snow more. I'll get into the numbers in a minute. But what I realized is I don't have to pick on us. I can pick on you guys. And just like I did, how do you affect the snowpack? So a sledder who's never gone off trail and they're just throttling slowly and keeping it flat. Versus this guy who just went off and landed with 200 pounds. It really isn't user group to user group so much as movement to movement and impacting the snow.
The video you showed with the snowmobile going over, is that real time or is it?
That was real time. Yeah. Yeah, that, we can go and watch it again, but so, we kind of developed our own, so this is Jeremy, it's called a skanky pit, that's what we call it. Basically, we cut out a 2 meter by 3 meter rock, we unsupported it, the exact same as we unsupport compression test or some Dalton test, and we ride over it either flat or dynamically to see what kind of pressure we're triggering. It's our way of modifying the compression test. Got anything to add here?
Oh, sounds.
Oh, come on, help.
So yeah, I think stress ball triggering and understanding of stress balls inside the snowpack is extremely important. I snowboard at a high level as well as I snowmobile at a high level. Dynamic movements inside the snowpack and maybe helps you better understand why you're getting away with something on one piece of terrain but not on a different piece of terrain. So you might get a false sense of security by getting away with skiing slope and be like, okay, well, it's probably safe 150 feet over there. But the lack of understanding of how your stress is impacting the different trigger points inside the snowpack and where your stress ball is reaching to, it can help you better understanding the potential for maybe snowmobile triggering or snowmobile triggering. And then a better understanding of those depths and those stress balls will help forecasters better understand how to communicate to the general public on the chances of triggering via snowmobile or, let's say, ski touring or something else. And I think where Shena's got to do with the idea of penetration is, in the ski snowboard community, tracks don't mean it's safe, and it's a really false sense of security to look at the track. A better understanding of snowmobile triggering is we affect quite deep into the snowpack, let alone being your second trip in the same track can change that dynamic to how deep you're penetrating inside the snow. So having a better understanding how we impact the snowpack from different user groups will help us better forecast for and help our forecasters as well, better understanding how to communicate.
So that's stress ball, like alpine versus tree line. Like alpine, you're gonna transfer deep, right?
Well, it doesn't matter about alpine or tree line, it's all about the snowpack and the density in the snow, as well as depending on where the layers exist and the spatial variability inside the ground cover.
Yeah, could you imagine this snowpack here? It can be extremely dense. So if you were to drop something on it, that won't transfer down because it's so dense that it can't transfer through. Or it could be soft powder. And remember, I talked about penetration. It could be soft powder, and you penetrate 3/4 of the way down. So you're, even if you don't have a lot of stress, you're still hitting that root layer. So it really doesn't matter if you're in the alpine tree line or the low tree line. It really matters more on the stress you're putting in, the penetration, and then that root layer depth, I guess.
So a better way to understand is if you take your skis or snowboard off and you put your foot in, you have foot penetration. Well, that's where your stress ball initiates from, right? Compared to the ski, that'll actually hold your weight on top of that slab.
Yeah. So I like, Ben mentioned bridging a bunch, and this is kind of where my brain goes back to, well, we're different than you guys. And I hate to say it, but in my mind, like, we have that March 8th notable layer, right? He was talking about it was a rain crest, right there. Rain crest, up to 2,000 meters. It's down about 60 to 90, that we said then?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's down about the sea. Okay, maybe if I'm just like smoothly moving over it, my stress isn't going to go past it and tickle that persistent flare and trigger an avalanche. But if I'm doing something extremely dynamic, like here's through the bow tie.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, here's a wheelie. Or let's just say I'm doing something very, very dynamic. I also have my motor. I'm not just me. I have my motor and I'm moving snow. So what if my snowmobile digs deeper than that bridge? What if I actually penetrate deeper than that rain crest? Now my stress ball can go down to that persistent flare. So that's just the way that I try to get my students to think about it, is just because we have that supportive crest, if we are penetrating through it, we still have the ability to tickle that big flare.
Sort of backing up a little bit with that conversation, sometimes when we have a bridge inside the snowpack, it's almost like putting a piece of plywood in there, right? That actually holds your weight a little bit. And so sometimes in bolting, you'll hear a lot of people talk about a breakable crust. So that breakable crust is sometimes you can break through that crust. It's kind of like stepping through it, and then your stress ball initiates from that step through. So how breakable is that bridge currently? And a lot of the times, like Ben was talking about January 26th at higher elevations, especially where the wind scoured and it ate through that rain crust, now it's almost some of the spots where that crust became quite breakable and easy to trigger the facets below it. So understanding bridging and the stress that you put into the snowpack is a real big factor in understanding avalanche triggering or slab avalanche triggering.
Like I said, no magic equation, just something I think about when I'm out there. So, with all of that kind of covered, penetration versus stressful versus dynamic movements versus user groups, I kind of put together this puzzle. Let me just see, I don't want to click to the next slide because I think it's a surprise. Okay, so here's the puzzle. Again, look at your partner or the person you looked at originally. What user group are they? Are they a skier, snowboarder, snowshoer, sledder, or snowrider? All right. Okay. Now, what version of that user are they? Are they the person who's moving very fluid without any dynamic movement across the snow, or are they the one making bombs?
Turbo man.
Yeah. Okay, so now that you've pictured what like we're running with, bear with me as I read this out. I'm gonna try and go slow but thorough. So, if an increase in penetration is the star we make on the snow. If an increase in penetration equals an increase in stress. All right, makes sense. If falling or tumbling as a skier or snowboarder also increases penetration, that means it also increases stress. I'm sorry, I got this from a paper. I apologize to all of the skiers in the room. Skiers stress the snowpack 1.5 times more than snowboarders. Right? Just the way we carve and turn, we put more stress. A skier stress goal potentially goes down to 1.2 meters deep. It's kind of why we use compression tests. I don't want to go too into it because I might be a little off here, but about 1.2 meters deep when we're doing our compression test to show us if we're adding stress to that persistent flare, we kind of quantify that with our skiing. So about that. Snow machines add considerably more stress than skiers. Snow machine stress goals potentially go down 2.2 meters deep. This is The most recent study I was a part of, we took some pressure plates, we stuck them in the snow, and we rode over them. And we wanted to find out how deep, as the snow really impacted the snow. And 2.2 meters was the initial data. So I'm running with it. So if we know all of that, it's like a puzzle. And we know there's 4 notable reef layers that are down 120 to 220 centimeters. They're 220 centimeters because Ben killed us. And we know there's a supported rain crest down 60 to 90 centimeters. This is all the information I'm giving you guys. Based on your riding partner's user group and dynamics as they ride, which one of your friends would be the most likely to trigger the current persistent layers in the snowpack?
Turbo Dan.
No break. And if that rain crest is acting like a bridge to dissipate our stress, is this a one-size-fits-all bridge? Or do we need to consider that it doesn't work for everyone?
Or understanding your bridge at altitude might be thicker in different elevation bands or different parts of your forecast region.
And right now, your forecast or your bridge is going to be actually getting thinner as you increase in elevation, with the nature of this one. Yeah.
Yeah, so these are all just things, like I said, there's no one-size-fits-all equation. These are just things that are going through my head as I'm out there. And yeah, I don't know what's that. Any questions? Go ahead. No, this literally is something that I kind of.
I got suckered into at 2:30.
No, I'm writing my paper on the bridging effects that snowmobile compaction. So snowmobilers, ski hills mitigate avalanche terrain with compacting the snowpack. I'm writing my paper on how snowmobilers do the same, but accidentally without realizing it because they're constantly driving through the snowpack. Awesome. Any other questions? Marty?
A lot of times they say like pro skiers, say it's like Alaska line at the top of the line, that they typically say you're gonna trigger an avalanche in the first 3 turns. That's where it has all the elements. So when you're filming in Alaska, a lot of these pros are really light on their feet these first couple turns. But how do you summarize pro and really experienced snowmobilers? Are they triggering things more because they're like, I'll call it hot dogging around? Or are they factoring in like the same sort of idea, like at the top of the slope, they're not digging in as much, they're like getting into it and then they're gonna start roofing, or what kind of experience with that?
You're talking about ridge top triggering, and that's your problem.
Yeah.
Because we don't utilize terrain in a similar fashion.
Yeah.
We attack terrain from the sides or the bottoms. It's you spend a lot of time ridge top entering.
Yeah.
If you spend, let's say, 70% of your day entering a slope from the ridge top, we spend 30% of our day.
Yeah.
So then, to answer your question, we start our day, I know nothing, and we do less snowpack analysis and more observations.
Yeah.
Observations are what give us our movement forward, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so less likely for ridge top triggering for us. So the bad couple of years we've had with professional guiding through heli skiing is a lot of ridge top triggering a couple of years ago, but where we didn't see a lot of snowmobile triggering happening at the same levels because of that breakable crust that did exist at the top. You were more likely, well, I perceive it's more likely I saw a lot of skier triggering and less likely to trigger snowmobiling because we attack from the bottom and from the side, and we really don't do mountain top descents as much.
That's not where it's fun.
Yeah. But different user groups and having that understanding helps us protect life.
Other questions, comments? Okay.
I guess I'm curious, just when I'm thinking about where a weak layer is, like, I'm thinking about like there's always maybe variability in how deep it's buried. And so I'm always giving it a margin of safety no matter what. So then I guess just like taking that and then taking this information, like how do you actually advise you to like take it as to keep any of this information into our decision making? Because you can say like, oh, there's these differences in how different user groups affect the stress effects of snowpack or whatever, but I'm already getting a margin of error to the depth of the weak layer.
I think what it comes down to is this is more focused for that low probability, high consequence scenario. So as that weak layer gets buried deeper and deeper, it goes into the back of our mind. We start thinking about it less. We start planning for it less. You're talking about things that are at the forefront of your mind or something you're managing. I'm kind of building this around my idea of when you guys have forgotten about these 4 P30 wells, I'm really worried. And so I don't want us as sledders to start getting complacent and thinking they don't exist.
And the backup Shena stop there, you worked with Marty a little bit. When PWL start hitting that 200 centimeter mark and they're consistently have that variability in the depth, they start skiing the fat part of the snowpack and taking a little more risk. Is that a point when snowmobiling can step out still, or are we still stepping back? Where the ski snowboard community might be still stepping out because of the depth of that.
Cool. Yeah, I think it's gonna be a really fun experience the next bit here because it's like the rain probably hasn't percolated all the way down to the weak layers, right? So skiers, on this weekend it's gonna get cold and we're gonna be on top of it. So we're gonna start gaining a lot of confidence because they're like, hey, we're on top of it. So that stress bubble is distributed quite wide for us skiers. But you guys are, that's just gonna be what we're gonna
It's gonna be
be.
the worst week of our lives.
Yeah.
We're gonna be breaking through, and
Yeah.
when you try and pull it up, my clients.
Some things are stressful is about a critical crack length, right? So when the stress ball goes in, you have to hit that weak layer, get a critical crack length for propagation to continue. And if your ball isn't fat enough when it touches it, then you have less likely the chance of getting critical crack length. So when your ball actually hits below and gets a wider section, you are more likely to get a critical crack length and full propagation.
Yeah, so that the bridging little breakable press might actually help us because we can only get one speaker.
Right.
And a lot of the times for us with a sled, if you actually put the stress plates in, we don't actually, if somebody was to stand beside us on 1 foot, they affect extremely quite a bit deeper than us just standing flat.
You're
because of
our
our
cat,
balance. I know what I used to do, I'm much lighter because of that. Or down.
Usually I make all the bad jokes or the soft jokes when I'm teaching my courses, but it's
But for me, I'm an avalanche survivor. I take avalanche education quite serious. At the end of the day, humans are progressing our knowledge. As we progress our knowledge, we're less likely to die in avalanches. And the goal is for all of us to keep progressing knowledge and understanding the stress faults and mitigation and critical crack length can help you protect yourself. You guys did a good job.
Awesome, you guys. Thanks so much for coming out tonight. I just really want to hit on that again, how we're not totally at a spring style snowpack. We're almost at the end. I think we're all just super curious what's going to happen with the snow. That was a great forecast that Ben gave us, but it's just totally new, and there's a bunch of information you have to gather. We're psyched to offer, we haven't offered Steel the Snowpack in April yet, but we've got another one coming up in April. So far this year, it's been like every time we've had one of these, it's been very dramatic. There's nothing else to talk about. Maybe next time it's just like Spring Brook, it's good to go. Just come with like really good things to say, but we'll definitely come with update what's going on in the snowpack. Maybe we start talking about glaciers, things like that in this next one. Just a reminder, you guys, if you find yourself in any other mountain towns, say the snowpack is there, if you'd like to donate or get involved in the community, check out saythesnowpack.com. Big props to everything that they've been doing. Thanks again to Taylor. Huge props to Ben and Shena. Thanks for coming out. And props to